What's up everyone, Alex here. Have you ever heard of Ultra Age? It's an indie game that came out just a couple of weeks ago, and in this video I want to give you my impressions of what I played. I estimate that I played about 2 to 3 hours of the game, and while it's not necessarily that long, it actually gave me a very full picture of what to expect for the rest of the game. That being said, this is published by Dangen Entertainment, and I want to thank them for providing me with a PS4 game code. This game is developed by 3 development companies, which is Next Stage, Visual Dart, and Intra Games. From my understanding, this is developed in Korea, so while it's not necessarily a Japanese game, it does have the vibe of character action games from Japan. So anybody who's played Devil May Cry or Bayonetta will be familiar with this style of gameplay. You're probably wondering who this character is and what exactly is happening in the story. I will tell you that the descriptions of the story in the various digital stores that you'll encounter in this game is 2 broad strokes. These descriptions will tell you about an extinction agenda that's going on, but really it's all about the journey of the main character, whose name is Age. I know, that's quite a silly name, but hear me out. Age essentially has a limited lifespan, and in order to extend it to eternal life, he took upon a mission to retrieve some sort of artifact, and that's pretty much the initial premise of the game. Obviously, I won't continue beyond that because there are twists and turns, but I just wanted to kind of set a baseline of what you're doing in the game. As far as the gameplay of Ultra Age goes, it's actually very interesting because unlike the games that I mentioned earlier, you don't necessarily have both a projectile weapon and a sword weapon. You mostly have 4 different kinds of sword weapons, each with their own advantages and disadvantages. For example, there's a flaming katana that you can use on wolves that really hits their weak points and allows you to instantly kill them should you get that weak point meter down. There's also a claymore that is a bit slow, but damages a lot of the robotic enemies that you face in the game a bit more. And my favorite has to be the lightning sword, because it actually stuns enemies, which is very crucial in this game because you face a lot of enemies at one time. The kicker here is that all of these swords actually don't last long. In fact, all of these swords seem to be consumable, and the way that you get new swords is by extracting them from crystals that are all over the world. Now, this might sound cumbersome because many of us have probably played games with mechanics that force us to either repair weapons or replace them. In this case, you are replacing them. But during my gameplay, that was never really an issue. It only became an issue when I preferred one particular weapon and I wanted to use that all the time. In which case, in the section that I am in the game, I wanted to use the lightning sword a lot because it really helped with crowd control. But how you're really asked to play the game is to cycle between different weapons and take advantage of their properties so that way you could be very efficient at taking down your opponents. And that leads me to another thing that's actually really cool about the game, which is when you change your sword, it actually comes up with a different property. So for example, if you change to the steel blade, it actually pops enemies up in the air. Whereas if you change to the claymore, your character will block. Keep in mind that there is no block in the game, there's just an evade. So I found it really strange that only by changing to Claymore could you actually stand your ground and block. But you probably don't want to do that because again, it's very easy for you to get overpowered by a ton of enemies, and so you're always got to be on the move. Much like other character action games, there is a way to target one enemy, so that way the camera follows them, but there are no options to automatically target the next enemy once you've defeated that one. And I found that to be a bit cumbersome, given that I'm used to a lot of other games that give you that particular option. Especially because the combat in the game is so blisteringly fast sometimes, that there was a tendency for me to actually play around with the camera so much more than what I normally do. So I had to get into the habit of clicking the R3 button so that way I would just automatically target the next enemy and focus on them. You use the right analog stick, left and right, to switch between targets. That's a great quality of life feature. But outside of that, the combos are fairly simplistic when you compare to the other games that I mentioned. I actually don't think it's necessarily to the game's detriment. I think because of the way that they want you to play the game, switching between swords, they really want you to get used to that sort of gameplay, and I actually really do like that. Unfortunately, not everything in the game is up to the quality of the combat. The voice acting, for example, specifically on Age, his performance seems to remind me of the PS1 era Resident Evil games. Not quite as bad, but the way that his delivery sounds is certainly evocative of that era.
Damn. I'm fine. I was just enjoying the unfamiliar air for a moment.
I think what's really fascinating is that his robot buddy actually has a better performance than he does, or in fact, any of the human characters that I've met in the game. So I find that very intriguing. I will have to stress, though, that even though I'm criticizing the voice acting of the game, I found it to be a bit charming and evocative of that era that I mentioned. It made me oddly intrigued with how much story there is to tell. Maybe it's some sort of morbid curiosity, but I have to be truthful that what's really pushing me forward is the gameplay. The game does run on Unreal Engine, and the game looks pretty good. It's a $30 game, and so I'm not expecting Platinum Games or Capcom levels of graphical fidelity, which again stresses the fact that the developers were more focused on delivering a blistering, fast-paced experience without any sort of distraction. Unfortunately, the level design sometimes kind of falters a little bit. I was in a section where it was in a factory and it's a lot of blocky rooms and stuff, and I almost got lost until I figured out that doors that could be opened had like a green light on it, but it's like a small sliver on the door itself, and most of the encounter rooms are the same format. I think another little ding for me are the enemy types. They're not quite varied, they are different colored, and they have different properties. Now, I recently played a game that have specific enemy types, but the difference with that game is that they actually tack on more physical features on those enemies to not make it look so similar than other enemies that you've fought before. And I don't necessarily think that Ultra Age is doing a good job of that. But I want to stress that not everything is bad in this game, which is why I saved talking about the progression system in this part of the video. So there are 3 things that you can do in order to upgrade Age's abilities and skills, one of which will actually require you to gain a type of currency that you can use to upgrade various aspects of your swords. You also use this ability to upgrade certain powers that you have, which also includes health regeneration and this powered up mode that you can activate in order to deal more damage. There's also this really interesting concept called modules, and what it does is that there are modules scattered about, and you can actually install those on your character in order to enhance certain aspects. For example, there are damage modules lying around. If you equip some of those, you'll be able to improve them. However, all the modules aren't made the same, so there are modules that actually decrease the amount of damage that you're dealing. And it feels to me that that's kind of like this interesting play on creating builds, but not as deep as other RPGs. Still, I think that all these systems really make it fun to experiment with what you can do in the game, and when combined with the gameplay, I think you'll have a good time. So ultimately, when you consider the gameplay of Ultra Age, it's actually a pretty good game. I just wish that the rest of the presentation would have helped build the gameplay up to an even greater height. It's not necessarily a bad game per se from a gameplay perspective, but if you are looking for an engaging story, the presentation might turn you off a bit. That being said, if you are interested in this game, there is a downloadable demo for it, should you wish to try it out. And that is Ultra Age. Now I'm kind of curious what you think of this game. Post your thoughts in the comments below and let's talk about it. Thanks for watching, everybody, and we'll see you in the next video.